You ever seen a man get laughed at right before the room goes quiet? The voice came from somewhere near the bar, low and amused, carried over the hum of engines idling outside like restless animals. Neon light flickered against the diner windows, casting long streaks of red across the polished chrome and chipped linoleum floor. It was just past 6:40 p.m., the kind of hour when truckers filled booths and waitresses moved on instinct, refilling coffee before anyone asked. And in the far corner, by the window that looked out onto the long stretch of highway, sat Samuel Walker. He was alone, a small cup of black coffee untouched in front of him, steam rising in slow, quiet spirals. His hands rested lightly on the table, weathered and still, like they had learned long ago not to waste motion. A worn wooden cane leaned against his leg, its surface scarred from years of use, the grip polished smooth by time. He didn't look at the door when it opened. Most people did. The sound of boots on gravel, the sudden cut of engines shutting off, the heavy slam of metal. Those sounds pulled attention whether you wanted it or not. But Samuel didn't move. He just kept his gaze fixed on the highway beyond the glass, where the last light of day stretched thin across the asphalt like a fading promise. The bell above the diner door jingled, sharp and out of place. Then came the laughter. Loud, confident. The kind of laughter that filled space without asking permission. 5 men stepped inside, leather jackets creaking, patches catching the light in flashes of stitched symbols and colors. Their presence changed the room instantly. Conversations softened. A fork paused halfway to a mouth. Someone near the counter lowered their voice without realizing it. The air shifted, subtle but undeniable. The man in front, broad shoulders, shaved head, the kind of posture that said he expected the world to make room for him, scanned the diner like he owned it. His eyes moved quickly, dismissing everything until they landed on the corner booth. On Samuel. He smirked. It wasn't a big expression, just a small twist of the mouth, like he had already decided something and found it amusing. He nudged the man beside him, said something too low for the room to catch, and they both chuckled. Boots hit the floor heavier now. As they crossed the diner, not toward the counter, not toward the open booths, but straight toward the old man by the window. Samuel didn't look up. The coffee in front of him had stopped steaming. Outside, a semi-truck rolled past, its low rumble vibrating faintly through the glass. The leader stopped at the edge of the booth, casting a long shadow across the table. For a moment, he just stood there, studying Samuel like he was trying to figure out a joke that hadn't landed yet. Then he leaned in slightly, close enough for the smell of leather and road dust to follow him. "Hey," he said, voice casual, almost friendly if you didn't listen too closely. "You waiting on someone, old man?" Samuel's eyes didn't move from the highway. Not immediately. There was a pause, long enough to feel deliberate. Then, slowly, he lifted his gaze just a fraction, not to the man in front of him, but to the reflection in the window. 5 figures behind him. Close. Loud. Certain of themselves. His expression didn't change. "Yes," he said quietly. Just one word. Calm. Unrushed. The kind of answer that didn't invite another question. The man blinked once, surprised, not by what was said, but by how it was said. Then the smirk returned, sharper this time. Behind him, one of the others laughed under his breath. The room held still, like it was waiting to see which way the moment would turn. And Samuel Walker, sitting in that corner booth with nothing but a cup of cold coffee and a cane worn smooth by decades, went back to watching the road, as if everything that mattered was still on its way. The man's smirk lingered a second longer than necessary, as if he was waiting for something else, some reaction, some sign that the old man understood his place in the moment. But Samuel Walker did not offer him anything more than that single word, and the silence that followed began to stretch in a way that felt unfamiliar to the group standing there, like a conversation that had quietly slipped out of their control without anyone noticing exactly when it happened, and behind the leader one of. The younger riders shifted his weight and glanced toward the counter where the waitress stood frozen with a coffee pot in her hand, her eyes flicking between them and the old man with a concern she did not voice, while the hum of the soda machine and the low buzz of neon filled the gaps where laughter had been just seconds before, and the leader exhaled through his nose and leaned back just enough to reclaim the space he thought he had lost, rolling his shoulders as if resetting the scene to something more familiar. Something he could steer again. "Well," he said, dragging the word out casually. Hope whoever you are waiting for knows you picked the wrong place. And a couple of the others chuckled on cue. The sound thinner now, less certain, but still present, still trying to push the moment back into something easy, something controlled. And Samuel's gaze shifted this time, slow and deliberate, not toward the man, but toward the cane resting against his leg, his fingers brushing the worn grip for just a second. A small, almost absent gesture, but one that seemed to ground him in a way that the room could not explain. And then he looked back out the window again, past the reflection of leather jackets and restless movement, back to the highway where headlights were beginning to appear one by one in the distance, steady and far off, like something approaching on its own time. And the leader followed that glance without meaning to, his eyes flicking toward the road, as if checking for something he had not been told about. But all he saw was the same empty stretch everyone else saw, long and quiet and unremarkable, and he scoffed softly, shaking his head as if dismissing the thought before it could take shape. You got some kind of attitude problem? He added, a little sharper now, a little more edge creeping into his tone as the need to reassert control pushed through the cracks of that earlier pause. And one of his men stepped closer to the table, resting a hand against the edge as he leaned in, his voice louder, meant for the room as much as for Samuel. We are talking to you, he said, stretching each word like it was a favor being offered. And still Samuel did not rush, did not flinch, did not shift in his seat beyond the quiet rise and fall of his breathing. And when he spoke again, his voice was just as even as before, just as measured. I heard you, he said, and there was something in the way he said it, something calm and absolute, that made the man at the table straighten slightly without realizing it, as if he had stepped too close to something he did not understand. And across the diner a fork clinked softly against a plate, too loud in the stillness, and the waitress finally moved, setting the coffee pot down with care before wiping her hands on her apron, her gaze lingering on Samuel for a fraction longer than necessary, as if searching for permission to intervene, but finding none. And outside the highway lights grew brighter, a pair of distant beams cutting clean through the dusk, steady, unhurried, drawing closer 1 mile at a time. While inside the diner the leader forced a laugh that did not quite land, clapping a hand once against the back of the booth like punctuation. Yeah, he muttered, more to his men than to Samuel now. This one thinks he is funny. But the words felt thinner than before, and somewhere beneath the surface of it all, beneath the noise and the posturing and the easy confidence they had walked in with, something had begun to shift, subtle and quiet, like a change in wind you only noticed if you had learned, a long time ago, how to listen for it. The tension did not break. It thickened, settling into the space between them like heat rising off blacktop in late summer. And the man standing closest to the table let his fingers tap once against the edge again, slower this time, as if testing something he could not quite name, while the leader shifted his stance and glanced back at his crew, expecting the usual rhythm to return, the easy laughter, the loud agreement. But what came back was uneven, a few half-smiles, a glance toward the door, another toward the window, small fractures in the confidence they had carried in with them, and it irritated him in a way he did not show directly. So he stepped forward again, closing the gap just enough to reclaim his presence, his voice dropping slightly, more controlled now. You always this quiet? Were you just saving it for us? He asked, and one of the others pulled out a phone, not aggressively, just casually. Like it was habit, like everything needed to be recorded, thumb hovering over the screen before pressing to start, the faint glow reflecting in his eyes as he angled it toward the booth. And Samuel noticed it, not with a turn of his head, but with a subtle shift of focus, the kind that came from years of seeing without looking directly. And still he did not react, did not acknowledge it, did not offer them anything they could use. And that, more than anything, began to unsettle the rhythm they depended on, because there was no resistance to push against, no reaction to amplify, just a stillness that absorbed everything and gave nothing back. And the man with the phone smirked as if to compensate, lifting it slightly higher. Go ahead, he said, voice louder now, projecting for an audience that did not yet exist. Tell us who you are waiting for. And the leader nodded once, encouraging it, leaning back just enough to give space to the moment, to let it play out. But Samuel's hand moved instead, slow and deliberate, reaching toward the table, not for the coffee, not for anything they expected, but for a thin metal chain that had been tucked just beneath the edge of his jacket, barely visible until now. And he drew it out a few inches, enough for the small tag at the end to catch the diner's light, dull and worn, edges softened by time. And it did not shine like something new. It did not carry the polished weight of display. It looked simple, almost forgettable. And that was exactly why one of the bikers laughed. Short and dismissive, stepping closer to get a better look. "That it?" he said, tilting his head. "That what you were holding on to?" And he reached out, not roughly, not with force, but with the casual entitlement of someone who assumed there would be no consequence, brushing the tag lightly with his fingers, turning it just enough for the engraving to face outward. And for a moment, no one spoke, because what was there did not match what they expected. No name, no rank, no clear identification. Just a single line etched into the metal in clean, deliberate letters. Raven Actual. And the man with the phone squinted at it through the screen, trying to process it, trying to decide if it was something to mock or something to ignore. And the leader leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing, reading it again as if it might change the second time. But it did not. It stayed exactly the same, simple, quiet, and somehow heavier than it should have been. And Samuel let the tag rest back against his hand, not hiding it, not displaying it, just holding it there as naturally as if it had always been part of him. And across the diner the waitress took a small step forward before stopping herself, her breath catching in a way she did not understand, while outside the approaching headlights grew brighter, closer now, no longer distant points, but defined beams moving steadily down the highway, unhurried, precise, and inside the diner. For the first time since the men had walked in, no one laughed. The letters did not move, did not change, but the weight of them seemed to settle into the room in a way no one could quite explain, and the man who had touched the tag pulled his hand back slowly, not out of fear, not yet, but out of something closer to hesitation, like he had brushed against something colder than expected, while the one holding the phone adjusted his grip and tried to recover the moment, angling the screen again, forcing a small laugh that did not carry the same confidence it had a minute ago. "Raven what?" he said, his voice just a little tighter. "That's supposed to mean something?" And the leader straightened, rolling his neck once as if shaking off the pause, stepping forward again with a firmer presence, determined to reassert the tone, to keep everything where he understood it. "Looks like a nickname to me," he added, glancing back at his crew for agreement. And a couple of them nodded quickly, eager to follow that lead, eager to return to familiar ground. But their eyes kept drifting back to the tag, to the clean simplicity of it, to the fact that it did not try to explain itself, and Samuel watched none of it directly, his gaze resting once more on the window, where the reflection showed more than the glass itself, the angles, the spacing, the small tells and posture that most people never noticed. And when he spoke again, his voice carried no edge, no challenge, just a quiet certainty that did not ask for belief. "It meant enough," he said, and he did not finish the sentence, did not add anything more, leaving it there like a line drawn in sand that no one else had seen being made. And the leader frowned slightly, the corners of his confidence pulling inward as he searched for something to push back with, something to break that calm. But before he could find it, a sound cut through the space, low and distant at first, the hum of engines approaching from the highway, steady and synchronized, not loud enough to dominate the room, but precise enough to be noticed if you were already listening for change. And Samuel's eyes shifted just a fraction, tracking the reflection as the beams outside grew brighter, no longer scattered traffic, but something aligned, something moving with intention. And across the diner the waitress took another step, this time not stopping herself, her eyes fixed on the tag now, on the letters she had read twice without understanding, and then a third time with a flicker of recognition she could not place, while the man with the phone lowered it slightly, distracted despite himself, his attention pulled toward the window as the light spilled further into the diner, stretching across the floor in long pale lines. And the leader followed that movement again, slower this time, his head turning toward the glass as the distant hum became clearer, closer. And for the first time since he had walked in, he did not speak immediately. He just listened, just watched, trying to decide if what was happening outside had anything to do with the quiet man sitting in front of him. And Samuel Walker, with the worn cane at his side and the simple tag resting against his hand, did not move, did not turn, did not acknowledge the shift that everyone else was beginning to feel, as if whatever was coming had already been accounted for long before any of them stepped through that door. The sound outside did not rush. It approached with a steady rhythm that felt deliberate, measured, like something that did not need to announce itself because it already knew it would be noticed, and the lights spilling through the diner windows sharpened, cutting clean lines across the floor and up the legs of the booths, shifting the color of the room from warm neon to something cooler, more defined, and the man with the phone lowered it completely now, his attention no longer on the screen but fixed on the reflection in the glass, where multiple sets of headlights aligned in a way that ordinary traffic never did, evenly spaced, moving together without drifting, without hesitation, and the leader took a slow step back from the table without realizing he had done it, his posture adjusting as if his body had registered something before his mind could catch up, while one of the others turned his head toward the door, listening more carefully now, the earlier confidence replaced by a quiet uncertainty that no one voiced, and Samuel Walker remained exactly where he was, his hand still resting near the small metal tag, his gaze calm, distant, as if the unfolding moment was simply the next step in something already set in motion, and the waitress moved again, this time all the way to the counter, her hand reaching beneath it where an old phone sat, her fingers hovering for a second before dialing a number from memory, not because she was told to, not because anyone had asked, but because something in her told her this was no longer just a diner conversation, and the line rang once, twice, before a voice answered on the other end, low and professional, and she hesitated only a fraction before speaking quietly, her eyes never leaving Samuel. I think you need to know someone is here, she said, and she did not use his name, because she did not know it. But something in her tone carried enough weight that the person on the other end did not interrupt, did not question immediately, and outside the engine slowed, the hum dropping lower as vehicles came to a controlled stop just beyond the diner's view, not abrupt, not aggressive, just precise, and the leader swallowed once, a small movement, almost invisible, his eyes flicking from the window back to Samuel and then back again, trying to connect something that did not yet make sense, while one of his men shifted his stance again, stepping slightly behind him now instead of beside him, a subtle change in formation that spoke louder than any words, and the man who had touched the tag rubbed his fingers together unconsciously, as if the feel of the metal still lingered there, colder than it should have been. And inside the diner the air grew quieter still, the kind of silence that was not empty but full, heavy with anticipation, and Samuel finally moved, just enough to lift his hand and let the tag fall back gently against his chest, the faint click of metal against fabric sounding louder than it should have, and then he reached for his coffee, not to drink, but to slide it slightly forward, clearing space in front of him as if preparing for something. And when he spoke again, it was not directed at the men around him, not a challenge, not a warning, just a quiet observation that seemed to settle into the room like fact. They are here, he said, and outside, car doors opened in sequence, soft, controlled, almost synchronized, followed by the measured sound of footsteps on gravel, steady, unhurried, and unmistakably intentional. The footsteps outside did not rush. They approached with a calm, deliberate cadence that carried through the thin diner walls and into the bones of everyone inside, and each step seemed measured, spaced evenly across the gravel, as if guided by something practiced and precise. And the leader felt it before he understood it, his shoulders tightening slightly as his eyes fixed on the door, waiting for it to move, while the man with the phone lowered it completely now, his hand hanging at his side. Forgotten, and the faint reflection of headlights flickered across his face as the engines outside idled low and controlled, not loud, not aggressive, just present. And then the bell above the diner door gave a soft chime as it opened, not slammed, not forced, just pushed inward with steady intent, and the first man stepped inside without hesitation, his posture straight, his gaze level, dressed in plain clothes that did nothing to draw attention, and yet somehow held all of it at once, and behind him, another followed, then another, each one moving with the same quiet coordination, spacing themselves without needing to look at one another, without needing to speak, and the room shifted again, not with noise, but with recognition, the kind that did not need explanation, and the leader took half a step back without realizing it. His earlier smirk gone now, replaced by something more cautious, more aware. As he watched the men enter and spread slightly, their presence filling the space in a way that made the diner feel smaller, more contained, and none of them looked at the bikers first. None of them acknowledged the tension that had been building. Their attention moved past it entirely, focused instead on the corner booth, on the old man by the window, and for a moment, everything held still, the hum of the lights, the quiet clink of dishes settling, the low idle of engines outside, all of it fading beneath the weight of that single shared focus. And then the man in front took one more step forward, stopping just short of the table, his expression calm, controlled, his eyes meeting Samuel Walker's with something that was not surprise, not urgency, but recognition, long and certain, and he gave a small nod, almost imperceptible to anyone not watching closely. And when he spoke, his voice was low, steady, carrying just enough to be heard without effort. "Sir," he said. And that one word landed differently than anything else that had been spoken in the room that night. Not loud, not commanding, but anchored in something deeper, something earned, and behind him, the others stood still, their posture relaxed but precise, hands at their sides, eyes forward, a quiet formation that needed no instruction, and the leader felt the shift fully now, the realization settling in without warning, his gaze moving from one face to another, searching for a sign he could understand, but finding none of the cues he was used to. No posturing, no challenge, just a calm certainty that did not invite interruption. And Samuel lifted his eyes from the window at last, meeting the man in front of him without hurry, without surprise, as if this moment had been expected long before the engines ever reached the parking lot. And for a brief second, something passed between them, unspoken, a recognition that did not need words. And Samuel gave the smallest nod in return, his voice quiet, unchanged. "Took you long enough," he said, and it was not a complaint, not a rebuke, just a simple acknowledgement, and the man allowed the faintest hint of a smile, controlled, respectful, before straightening slightly, his presence settling into the room like a final piece falling into place, while behind him, one of the others turned his head just enough to glance toward the bikers, not with hostility, not with threat, but with a calm awareness that made it clear the moment had shifted completely, and nothing that had been happening before still held any weight. No one spoke for a few seconds after that single word settled into the air, and the silence that followed was not uncertain anymore. It was defined, structured, like something had quietly taken control of the room without raising its voice. And the leader of the group felt it fully now, the shift that could not be reversed, his stance no longer forward but held in place, as if stepping any closer would mean crossing into something he did not understand. And the man who had addressed Samuel remained exactly where he was, his posture calm, his attention steady, not rushing, not demanding, simply present in a way that made everything else feel secondary. And behind him the others adjusted subtly, not forming a line, not creating a barrier, but existing in a quiet alignment that spoke of long training and shared instinct. And one of them moved just half a step to the side, clearing a path from the booth to the door without announcing it, without drawing attention, and the gesture was so smooth that most of the room did not consciously register it, but everyone felt it. And Samuel noticed, of course he did, his eyes flicking once toward the open space before returning to the man in front of him. And there was a pause, a brief exchange of stillness that carried more weight than any explanation. And then Samuel's hand moved again, slow and deliberate, reaching for the cane resting against his leg, his fingers wrapping around the worn grip with practiced ease. And when he rose, it was not hurried, not strained, just measured, the kind of movement that respected its own pace. And the man in front stepped back just enough to give him room, not out of obligation, but out of respect that required no instruction. And the others mirrored it without needing to look, creating space that had not been there a moment ago. And across the diner the leader exhaled quietly, a breath he had not realized he was holding, his eyes tracking the movement, trying to make sense of the way everything had shifted around a man he had dismissed just minutes earlier. And one of his crew lowered his gaze slightly, the earlier edge gone, replaced by something closer to uncertainty, while the man with the phone slipped it into his pocket without another word. The recording forgotten entirely, and the waitress stood still behind the counter, her hands resting lightly on the surface, watching as Samuel took one step forward, then another, each one steady, unhurried, and the sound of the cane against the floor echoed softly, a quiet rhythm that now seemed to guide the room itself. And as he passed the men who had surrounded him moments ago, none of them moved to stop him. None of them spoke. They simply shifted back, just enough to clear the way, their earlier presence dissolving without resistance. And the man who had touched the tag looked down briefly, his expression tightening as if something had settled into place inside him, something he would not be able to ignore later. And when Samuel reached the edge of the open path, he paused for just a fraction of a second, not turning fully, not addressing anyone directly, but his voice carried just enough to reach them, calm and even. "Take care of the road," he said, and it was not a warning, not advice, just a simple statement that seemed to land deeper than it should have. And then he continued forward, moving toward the door where the night air waited, and the men who had arrived stepped aside in perfect quiet, their presence guiding without touching, without directing. And as Samuel Walker walked out of the diner, the room remained still, held in that same silence, as if no one was quite ready to speak again. The night air outside felt different, cooler, quieter, as if the highway itself had taken a breath, and the soft crunch of gravel under measured footsteps carried just beyond the diner's door, where the line of dark vehicles waited with engines idling low, their presence controlled and deliberate. And Samuel Walker stepped out into that space without hesitation, his cane touching down with the same steady rhythm, his posture unchanged, as if the world beyond the diner was simply another part of the same path he had already chosen. And the man who had spoken inside moved alongside him, not leading, not following, but positioned just slightly behind and to the side, a placement that spoke of habit, of respect, of understanding without words, while the others spread naturally around them, not forming a barrier, but creating a quiet perimeter that felt both open and protected at the same time. And no one raised their voice, no one issued commands. Everything moved with a calm precision that made it clear this moment did not require force, only presence. And Samuel paused near the first vehicle, his eyes lifting briefly toward the horizon where the last trace of daylight had disappeared, leaving only the soft glow of distant highway lights stretching across miles of open road. And, for a second, the scene seemed to fold back on itself, as if time had layered this moment over another long ago, something quieter, something carried in memory rather than spoken aloud. And the man beside him noticed the pause, but did not interrupt it, did not ask. He simply waited, his posture still, his gaze forward, allowing the silence to exist as it was. And after that brief moment, Samuel gave a small nod, more to himself than to anyone else, and shifted his weight slightly, adjusting his grip on the cane before stepping forward again. And one of the men moved to open the vehicle door, not quickly, not dramatically, just smoothly, as if it had always been part of the sequence. And the interior light flickered on, casting a soft glow that contrasted with the darkness outside. And Samuel did not enter immediately, instead turning his head just enough to glance back toward the diner, not searching, not questioning, just acknowledging. And inside, through the glass, the figures still stood where they had been left, unmoving, watching, the leader now quiet, his earlier confidence replaced by a stillness that looked more like reflection than defeat. And the man with the phone had not taken it back out, his hands resting at his sides as he stared at the empty booth where everything had shifted, while the waitress stood behind the counter, her expression softer now, as if something had been confirmed that she could not fully explain. And Samuel's gaze lingered only a second before returning forward, and then, without another word, he stepped into the vehicle, lowering himself with care, the movement controlled and practiced, and the door closed with a muted, solid sound, sealing the moment without drama. And outside, the men took their positions just as quietly as they had arrived, each one moving with the same measured intent. And as the engines adjusted slightly, preparing to pull away, there was no rush, no sudden movement, just a smooth transition, as if the entire scene had been part of a plan that required no explanation. And in the diner, the silence held a few seconds longer, stretching across the empty space Samuel had left behind, before a single breath was released somewhere near the counter, soft and uncertain, and even then, no one spoke, because some moments did not need words to be understood. The vehicles pulled away from the diner without urgency, their headlights sweeping briefly across the windows before settling back onto the long stretch of highway, and the low hum of engines faded gradually into the distance until it became just another sound swallowed by the night. And for a few seconds after they were gone, no one inside moved, no one spoke, as if the absence of that quiet presence had left something behind that the room was still trying to understand, and the leader remained where he stood, his eyes fixed on the empty doorway, replaying the moment in a way he could not quite control, searching for the point where everything had shifted and finding that it had never really been his to control in the first place. And one of his crew exhaled slowly, running a hand over the back of his neck, as if shaking off a tension he had only just realized was there, while another looked down at the floor where the faint lines of light had been moments before, now gone, leaving nothing but the dull reflection of the diner's neon glow, and the man with the phone hesitated before pulling it back out, glancing at the blank screen, then slipping it away again without unlocking it, the need to record replaced by something quieter, something more reflective, and at the counter the waitress finally moved, reaching for the coffee pot, and filling a cup that no longer had an owner, the dark liquid settling with a soft ripple before she stopped, realizing there was no one there to take it, and she set it down gently, her eyes drifting toward the corner booth where Samuel had sat, the imprint of the moment still lingering in the space, and the leader shifted his weight, his voice lower now, stripped of the earlier edge. "Who was that?" he asked. Not to anyone in particular, but the question did not carry the same demand it would have before. It sounded more like an admission, and no one answered, not because they did not want to, but because none of them had the words, and the silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was steady, grounded, like something had been clarified without needing explanation, and one by one, the men turned away from the booth, their movements slower, more deliberate, as if the room itself required a different kind of presence now. And when they finally stepped back toward the door, it was without the same noise they had entered with, the bell above the frame giving a softer chime as it closed behind them, and outside, the highway stretched on under the dark sky, unchanged and endless, carrying whatever had just passed through it forward without pause. And inside the diner, conversations did not return right away. The clink of dishes remained subdued, voices quieter, as if everyone understood, in their own way, that something rare had just unfolded in front of them, something that did not need to be explained to be felt, and the empty booth by the window remained untouched for a long moment, the cup of coffee cooling slowly under the neon light, a small, quiet reminder that respect did not arrive with noise or force, it arrived in silence, and once it was seen, it was not easily forgotten.